I'm Michael Sheppard. I'm a psychologist in Vancouver. And my background in specific emotion regulation training is that I did a postdoctoral fellowship at the DBT Center of Vancouver. DBT is a type of therapy that's very skills focused and helps people create more stability in lives that are colored by emotion dysregulation and emotional and relationship instability. Alicia is a graduate student that I've worked with a lot. We actually 2 years ago did Emotion Regulation 101.
That's right.
And so we called this one 102, but about 5 people that weren't family and friends came to that talk. And this talk has what, 40 something people in it right now. So calling it 102 is you guys missed the prereq. It's from 2 years ago.
I was going to say they're missing the prerequisite. Yeah.
So no worries. Some of this is repeat. And yeah, I guess I just want to get started then. Do you want to add anything, Alicia?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much covered it. So I'm currently sort of following in the steps of Michael right now, and I'm a 5th-year doctoral student. And at this point, I'm also doing therapy with clients and just trying to get more skills, and looking forward to doing this talk with Michael because last time was a lot of fun. So let's jump right in.
So Alicia has all the power because only one of us could control the PowerPoint show. So she has it. I typed in COVID and mental health, and the first 4 things that I found, I just screen captured and posted them in here. We know that the last almost 3 years of COVID have had effects on people's mental health because it's stressful. The whole situation is stressful. We at the beginning, when we couldn't go outside, it was stressful. We were cramped up in our houses with family members, or we were lonely, or we couldn't go to work but couldn't do anything else either. And so it matters because we have a general rhythm outside of COVID for what we do to manage our feelings. I mean, most of us do, even if it's not specific or deliberate or even conscious. It's just what we find ourselves doing. For example, going to the gym. But the gym openings have come and gone. And what do you do when you can't go to the gym or can't something? And so this talk is a little bit about how to manage emotions regularly, but also with the stressors that COVID brings. Take it away, Alicia.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this has been a trying time for all of us. And so we're hoping that as a result of this talk, you'll walk away with a bit of an understanding about what emotions are and like how better to manage them or manage them a little bit more skillfully, given the context that we're in and the restrictions that are placed upon us or the restrictions that come and go. So we thought that a helpful place to start would be, well, what are emotions to begin with? So we can think of emotions as being these like super fast, full body alerts. And these alerts tell us something about our environment. They communicate information to those around us, and they motivate us to act. Now, the important thing to remember is that emotions come from a part of our brain that is really, really evolutionarily old. So anytime anytime that's the case, we know that it was necessary for our survival. Anything that is evolutionarily old was necessary for us to survive. And so because of this, emotions are really just trying their best to keep us alive. And so because they're so fast and because that's what they're trying to accomplish, sometimes they get triggered by our interpretations of what's happening instead of what's actually factually happening. And so I include this little illustration on the side here because I think it really highlights the message I'm trying to convey. So if we were walking down the street, you are more likely to see the huge shadow that's being projected on top of that wall. And that shadow is likely to elicit a response of fear. And that fear is going to probably come way before you've had a chance to take a second and evaluate what's going on. And then at which point you might realize that it's actually coming from a really cute small little animal that's not actually a threat to you. So, okay, but how do we go about figuring out what the heck we're feeling and whether it's this like in response to an interpretation or what's actually going on? So the answer to that, or at least one of the answers to that, is mindfulness. Now, before I continue, this is that first opportunity for you to type something into the chat. Mindfulness is something that has kind of gained popularity over the last several years, and we were wondering, what have you heard of mindfulness? What do you think it is? So just take a few moments and start typing away into the chat. now.
We have our first answer here, which is presence, a practice of being more in the body, in the moment with your body, in the present, being here and now in the present moment, watching your thoughts, but not following them,
Right.
bringing your attention inward, a lot of being in the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, so absolutely, present moment awareness and attunement to things like your body sensations are definitely a part of it. So mindfulness, no matter how we define it, and we'll give one of the definitions of mindfulness in the next slide, because sometimes they differ depending on the source that you go to. But no matter how it is that we exactly define it, mindfulness is a skill. And we can think of mindfulness as something that needs to be cultivated the same way that when we build muscle, we need to train the muscle, and it takes like a sustained, concerted effort. It's something that we have to do consistently over a long period of time to strengthen it. So one metaphor that I like to use is it's kind of like bicep curls for our attention, or bicep curls for our awareness. So I've left you all with a resource here in this QR code. If you have your cell phones with you, you'd like to maybe kind of give it a scan. This is a really helpful resource. It has a whole bunch of guided meditations from a very reputable source. So I'm kind of leaving you that if you'd like to work on your mindfulness muscle. But perhaps you would like to know what the heck mindfulness is. So the definition that we're running with is by Jon Kabat-Zinn. He is the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction. There's actually a talk coming up as part of Psychology Month about MBSR, if you're curious to learn more. But according to Kabat-Zinn, mindfulness is awareness, like a lot of you pointed out, but that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So, I would like, if I were in your shoes, I might be asking myself, well, what are the things that I might even be tuning into in the present moment? What might I be even looking for? So some of the things that comprise our present moment experience are our thoughts, our judgments, memories, our actual feelings, our emotions, any physical sensations in our body, and our urges. And so we're going to see this little character, this little kind of stick figure character a couple times throughout this presentation. And he'll always signal to us that there is some mindfulness taking place in the examples that we're going through. Okay, so this has already been, I think, quite a little bit of information. So mindfulness might help us make sense of what I'm feeling. That's great, but we're in this talk because COVID is a thing. It's been affecting us and continues to affect us. So how can I put these pieces together to help reduce my vulnerability to emotional overwhelmedness, as we're calling it? And how do I manage unwanted emotions if or when they surface? So to reduce our vulnerability to unwanted emotions, we can pretty much think about this concept as stocking up on coping gas. So coping gas is our ability to cope with stress. And there are times in our lives with more stress that this gas gets used up more quickly. And so we have to do more to keep filling up that tank. COVID is a perfect example of such a situation. And so what are the things that we can fill our tank with? Well, there's actually a bunch. We can think of these three as being the ABCs of coping. The A stands for accumulating positive experiences. So basically, we want to do things that give us some pleasure, even if it's less than it used to, even if it's not a lot, but just little increments, little bites of something that we enjoy. But we also want to start doing things that give us a sense of, I can do it-ness. So we want to start setting goals for ourselves. We want to start, clearing out the pile of laundry that's been lying in the corner, or maybe we're going to start building that deck that we've been thinking about building, something to give us a sense that we kind of have some control and that we can handle things. What we also want to do is, if there's ever a situation that we can predict will be stressful for us, we want to mentally rehearse how we're going to cope with that situation before we get there. And what's really cool about this is that our minds can't tell if we've rehearsed something in real life or if we've rehearsed it in our imaginations. So actually, by running it through in our minds, we're preparing for the actual thing. And we know this works because this is what athletes do all the time. Ahead of a big game, an athlete will replay the play that they're hoping to execute when it's game day, and it helps. So the last thing here that is also important to help us regulate and fill up on that coping gas is taking care of our bodies. So that includes things like taking our medications if we're taking any, tending to our hygiene on a daily basis, eating in balance, avoiding substances or limiting our alcohol intake. That's one way we can think about that. Sleeping in balance, and also exercising in balance. So this information might not be new to us. So what I think is really important given the context of this presentation is to ask you all, how have you coped, or how have you filled up on coping gas before the pandemic? And what are some of the creative solutions that you've come up with as a result of the restrictions placed upon us in the pandemic? So what's like the before and after picture for stocking up on coping gas for you all? Feel free to type that into the chat.
More bath time.
Yes.
Meditation.
I don't think I've ever spent as much money on bath bombs as I have in the last 2.5 years, I have to say.
Exercise, Zooming with friends since we can't get together.
Yeah.
Reading, virtual hangouts, and of course, before pandemic, seeing friends, more exercise. Yeah. We have some cycling and yoga, plant care, jogging.
Amazing. And so a lot of these ideas sound like they can actually fall into one or both of these categories, where some of these things might be purely pleasurable, but some of them might have that component of building mastery too. You know, I can imagine, for example, that it's like yoga you mentioned, Alexina, where for some people yoga might be inherently pleasurable, but there might also be that element of wanting to get better, or aiming to reach that pose that we still can't reach. And so there is that like incremental building of mastery that might happen in some of those too. So those are all really great. Thank you guys. Michael?
I think I'm up. Yeah. One thing I wanted to add to that last one is we've had to be creative during COVID because we can't always do what we did. For example, yoga studios have been patchy. Sometimes we can go to them and sometimes we can't. So when we're practicing the ABCs of emotion regulation, we need to be more flexible during a situation like COVID than we have in the past. When I worked in corrections, there was a way less available to a lot of the inmates. So they had to think of what can they do. And we're in, it's not that extreme, but it can be extreme. If we still want to do yoga and can't go to the studio, maybe we can do it with YouTube or virtually or something like that. Moving to managing the emotions once they're there, the emotions are still going to happen even though we're doing the ABCs. And so we want to make sure that our emotions are telling us the truth. Remember, they're the brain's best guess about what's going on. They're a very fast event. And I guess Alicia there we go. Thanks. Just play this one by ear and hit the thing. You wrote this slide. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So when an emotion fits the facts, not just when our interpretation of the emotion is accurate. So for example, if we feel fear and there actually is danger, then the emotion fits the facts of the situation.
Oh, what is this?
Oh, that's cool. I don't know what that is.
I don't know what happened there either. Oh, and there it's gone.
But sometimes our emotion doesn't fit the facts of a situation. And then you can call that emotion unjustified. These aren't judgmental things. The emotion, it does or does not fit the facts of the situation. There's some small print here. Remembering that emotions are just trying their best to keep us alive. And so our brains will go close enough. If something bad happens and it thinks it's happening again, it'll go close enough and it'll lower that bar if lots of things that we don't like happen. I mean, PTSD is arguably where the brain is saying the bad thing is happening all the time, right? Then the bar is at 0. So we can have unjustified emotions a little bit, or we can have unjustified emotions a lot. But I wanted to go over just a page that's really a chart. There we go, of 10 basic emotions, what their action urges are. I'm not going to read this to you. It's a ton of, well, not a ton, it's a lot of information that's boring to be read too, because it's in chart form, but it's useful. I don't know what that is.
I'm not sure.
It's useful to know what justifies an emotion. So have a look at this, and if you have thoughts or questions about it, put them in the chat.
So I just want to say, it does look like participants who may be wanting to highlight things for themselves, it's actually highlighting for everybody.
Oh,
I'm
I
currently
didn't even know we could do that.
trying to look into disabling that, but yeah, just so all of you participants are aware, it
That's
does
awesome.
for everyone.
And these slides will be available. So I think someone in the chat said, will that QR code be available? Absolutely. The slides will be available.
Plus the talk is being recorded, and eventually it's going to be posted up on BCPA's YouTube channel anyway, so it'll be available.
Anger is a special case emotion where people sometimes think that anger is always a secondary emotion, meaning it's in response to another emotion. Someone just said hello. But are there any questions about this list? If there aren't any questions, I'm just going to move on, assuming that the audience has a pretty good understanding. Sorry, the chat's funny. That the audience has a pretty good idea of under what circumstances what emotions are justified. In which case, let's move on. There's a decision tree. If you can think in terms of this decision tree, which feels clunky to begin with, it's actually life-changing to think in terms of this decision tree. So let's start with it. The step one is you need mindfulness, because you need to be aware that you have an unwanted emotion before you can do anything about it. So mindfulness is when you're paying attention to the present moment, you're looking at your feelings, your urges, your sensations, your thoughts, and your senses, and you've detected an unwanted emotion. The main question is this emotion working for me? Is it telling me the truth about the situation, meaning is it justified? And would acting on it be useful? This happens really, really fast once you start practicing this. You're already doing it in your life. The step to add to this is to check the facts, because our emotions sometimes give us false positives. So in one circumstance, the emotion is justified, and look, and is underlined for a reason. Both of these things need to be true. This column, there's going to be 3 columns. This one says the emotion is working for you. It's telling you the truth about the situation, and the impulse that comes with it is a useful impulse. And if that's the case, then do what it says. Act on the urge. And if you need to afterwards, solve the problem, because the emotion is signaling a real problem because it's justified. And so we have an example here of managing a justified emotion with an effective action with Stickman. So Stickman's in dialogue with a friend, and he's, I don't know, in a room or outside, whatever. And the friend has just told them that they might have COVID. I wouldn't be happy, personally. I can't imagine most people would be. And so with a little bit of mindfulness, Stickman is aware that he's got a sense of fear, some thoughts about what if he has COVID, worry thoughts, what's he going to do? Is he going to be okay? Physiologically, he's noticed his heart rate has gone up, and he's got this impulse to make some distance from the speaker, maybe at least 6 feet or 2 meters. And so if he checks this, is the fear justified, and would acting on it be effective or helpful? Let's have a look at that fear section from that table. Fear signals it's justified if there's danger. This person has told me they might have COVID, so there is a threat, and my impulse to create distance is justified and effective. So what would I do? Act on the urge. Now, after that, I might need to problem solve. And that's another slide. Problem solving, when this starts to become habitual and we start to do it more, our lives become easier because the solutions present themselves. So in this case, someone has told me that they might have COVID. I've created distance, but I'm still not happy. What's the problem? You can write it in the chat, what you think the problem is. There's always that lag while people are typing. I hope people are typing. Are people typing? Oh, there we go. Now I feel lonely. Maybe I feel lonely. That could be part of it, right? If I'm all alone and I have to isolate from everyone. Yeah, the question is, I've been talking to someone and we haven't been wearing masks in the picture, or at least the other person wasn't. And they've told me they think that they might have COVID. And my first impulse in the short term, it was to make distance, to feel safe again. But what about in the long term? And long term is like anything longer than immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the problem? Why am I still upset? So what are some of the things people have been writing, Alexina?
Yeah, I see fear of getting COVID and the repercussions it might have on my life.
Yeah.
Fear, feeling like you can't trust others and that they may not tell you.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say before the meetup and have now been possibly exposed. The relationship may have changed, boundary breaking.
Right. Yeah. Or what am I going to do? Am I going to infect others? So I'm going to work with worry that I could infect others, or worry that I might have COVID, because those are similar. I'm going to say that's the problem, but you want to describe the problem in fact-based language. That means no assumptions, no interpretations, no judgments. Could be, I'm afraid I might have COVID. Sure. I mean, we could do the same problem solving with some of the other things that people mentioned, because, for example, trust or betrayal or having hurt my friend's feelings. But let's say I'm afraid that I might have COVID. What could a goal be? And again, write that in the chat. If we're working with, I'm afraid I might have COVID because I was exposed to someone who might have COVID, what could a goal be? What do I want to have happen? That's a solution. Crystal, you're jumping the gun.
Isolate
What's the goal?
home. Mm-hmm.
These are no worries. These are all solutions. We're going over this with a fine-tooth comb. The problem is I'm worried that I have COVID. What would you do if that were the problem? I'm worried that I might have COVID. How could I find out? Yeah, sure. Call off work, get a test. Exactly. And then the question, for example, might become, how do I get a test? And now we're dealing with, if I take these steps toward the solution, I'll probably feel better. Yeah, get tested and isolate. These are simple solutions, straightforward solutions to the problem, because once the problem has been identified, the solution starts to present itself. Sometimes it feels too easy. That can't be the solution. Yeah, that's the goal. How am I going to get there? And how am I going to get there is all the steps of 3. Point 3 here, brainstorming actions. It could be order a test online. It could be get a test from friends. It would be use one of the tests I stockpiled, all sorts of things. The 2 things you want to ask yourself with problem solving, once you've come up with different action options that you could do, is 1, would I actually do it? Because you might brainstorm something you wouldn't actually do. And the other one could be, will it address my problem? Getting tested is something personally I have done, so I know I would do it again. And it directly addresses the question of, do I have COVID? And potentially addresses the question of, do I need to isolate? So problem solving is, there's some steps that you can go through. We already do this fairly intuitively, but sometimes we can get caught on an issue. And when that's the case, we probably haven't identified the problem in fact-based language or identified the goal that we're working toward. So those are the 2 main things, then brainstorming solutions. I'm going to pass it on. I think, yep, I'm passing it on to Alicia now.
Sounds good. So at this point, we've covered, okay, like we are experiencing some situation and we're feeling something. And so we used all our mindfulness, just like that stick man has. And, we're kind of in this situation where we go, okay, like I'm dealing with something that I don't want to be feeling. What do I do? We've gone through the scenario in which the emotion that we're dealing with is justified and effective or skillful. But there's also going to be a situation where the emotion is either unjustified, so it doesn't fit the facts of the situation, or the urge or impulse that accompanies it is actually ineffective or unskillful. So in that situation, the moment we notice the feeling come on, because remember, emotions are really fast, what we're going to do is we're not going to act on the urge. And immediately after that, we're actually going to try practicing something that's called opposite action. So opposite action is pretty much what the name implies. What we're actually going to try to do is we're going to try to do the exact opposite of what the impulse or urge is telling us to do. So here's another chart that kind of shows examples of opposite action for different emotions. And I'm gonna highlight a couple. So in the previous example, we talked about fear in a situation where it was justified and effective. If it wasn't, if it was that kind of situation where we came across that shadow of the wolf, but it was really like a cute little animal, the opposite action of avoiding danger or hiding would actually be to approach the thing that's causing the unjustified or ineffective fear. And for any of you who have ever gotten over like a phobia, like a spider phobia or a snake phobia, you'll know that the exact thing that you had to do was to actually approach the thing that was causing the fear over and over until that fear eventually went away. And so the other one that I'm going to draw your attention to, because it will come up in our next example, is anger. So the action urge with anger is to attack, but the opposite action of anger is one, either to walk away if you can. We know this to be incredibly effective, but if you can't, try to be kind and try to see the situation from the other person's point of view. And now, I don't know if it's just me, but I felt like I heard like some eye rolls in that situation. And that's because acting opposite to an emotion is really hard to do. Emotions are these full body responses. Every ounce of us is telling us to do the thing that the emotion wants us to do. And what we're suggesting is to actually do the exact opposite. So there are some things to keep in mind in order for opposite action to be helpful. So when you do it, you got to do it all the way. You got to go big or go home, throw 100% of yourself into doing the exact opposite of what you want to do. Doing it kind of like halfway, or like, yeah, okay, I'll be nice, it's not going to work. Opposite action works primarily by creating this like incongruence between what you're feeling and wanting to do versus what you're actually doing. When your body, when your facial expressions, what you're thinking and how you're saying, when all of that does not align with the emotion, it's actually going to change the emotion, since emotions are full body responses. If we're doing the opposite, it's just going to change. So another thing to keep in mind though, is we're not telling you to all of a sudden like stop being angry and start being nice and just like feel warm and fuzzy all of a sudden. When practicing opposite action, you actually want to continue feeling what you're feeling. Don't suppress it. Allow the anger, if the emotion is anger, to be there. Finally, continue doing the opposite action until the emotion reduces in intensity, even if it's just a little bit. So why don't we go through an example of managing an unjustified or ineffective emotion? So in this situation, somebody just said something about COVID that you think is wrong. I'm just gonna like draw everybody's attention to that guy's orange Nikes because they will be relevant. So you notice that this has just transpired, and you're going to do the mindfulness thing. You're going to gain awareness of your present moment by paying attention on purpose and non-judgmentally. And in this case, what you find is you're feeling really angry. You're having these thoughts that are telling you that you have to correct this person. Maybe you're throwing some judgments out there, like how could they be so dumb? What's wrong with them? You're noticing yourself getting red in the face, heat in the cheeks. And in this situation, you're noticing that actually what you want to do is you want to scream at them. So what is the next thing that you're going to do? Well, just like before, what you're going to do is you're going to ask yourself, is my anger justified? And acting on my urge will be effective or skillful, and then you check the facts. So, is the anger justified? Well, we see that anger is justified in situations where you need to protect something you care about, including your sense of right and wrong, or fairness or unfairness. So given that, and given what just transpired, Stickman over here is going to conclude that his anger is justified, except in this situation, his urge is actually ineffective. Remember, we defined effectiveness or skillfulness as acting in a way that's either going to get you closer to achieving a goal that you wanted to, or that it's going to prevent new problems from arising. In this situation, Stickman concludes that that's actually not going to be the case. So he's not going to act on his urge, even though that's exactly what he wants to do in that moment, and he's going to act opposite. So let's watch Stickman act opposite to his anger. Remember, opposite action to anger actually has a couple options. Stickman is going to walk away if he can. And what you'll notice, though, is that he walked away with the emotion of anger, with that redness and heat in his face, with those thoughts. He didn't try to get rid of his anger. He did the opposite of what his anger wanted to do, which was to attack. Now, we don't know the circumstance. Maybe Stickman encountered this person in a situation where he couldn't leave. In that situation, he's going to try to be kind and see the situation from the other person's point of view. This is where those orange Nikes come into play, because he put himself in the other person's shoes. So here's an example of where he just like still feeling that anger, still feeling his experience, says kindly and gently, you know, based on the information that you have, I can see how someone could think that. That said, let's just agree to disagree, though. Remember, this is really hard to do.
I think this is me.
I think that's it.
That's right. Sometimes there's too much emotion. There we go. And so there's a different set of skills for that. They're crisis survival skills and reality acceptance skills. We're not going to go, they're not really the focus here. The heart of crisis survival is redirecting your attention. But I want to summarize what we've been talking about. We've been talking about figuring out what our emotions are. Okay, they're these cues from our bodies that are interpretations about what's going on, that are, I guess, biologically designed to keep us safe or alive. And they come with action urges. And there's a whole slew of them. And mindfulness is important to know what we're feeling, because sometimes the emotion's working for us and we need to know what the emotion is and what the urge is and whether it's effective. And if it is, then what do we do? And also sometimes the emotion is not working for us. An example of an emotion that isn't working for us would be a phobia. Like if you have a phobia of butterflies, you know, aside from like demon butterflies, which I've never met, there aren't any dangerous butterflies, at least not in Canada. And so fear of the butterfly, there's no danger, but there is fear. That's an unjustified emotion. And so we talked about what to do when the emotion's unjustified. The first part is not acting on the urge. I think everyone in the audience has done that in an argument where they didn't say a devastating comeback. They had the comeback, then they didn't say it. That's an example of not acting on the urge. Opposite action is a lot harder to do. It's a lot less intuitive, and it's really effective. Because the emotion, when it's not supported by the situation, will burn out if you let it. But acting on the emotion or avoiding the thing or getting away from the impulse doesn't give your system a chance to readjust. And as Alicia said, it's really, really difficult. And so sometimes it's too hard to do on our own. Next slide, please.
Before we go on, I just wanted to jump in and add that we're really framing mindfulness as a way to do a couple things. One, it's to gather all the information that we need to decide what we're feeling to begin with and whether it's justified or unjustified. But also, since emotions are so hardwired to be so fast and sometimes get triggered when in situations where they're not called for, mindfulness allows us to basically increase the gap between the moment where we notice we're having a feeling and the action that wants to accompany that feeling. So sometimes we probably have had, the experience of when we get really, really angry, it's really easy for us to immediately, come back with that comeback or throw that insult. The time from when we notice we're pissed off to, we do the thing is very short. So mindfulness actually helps us increase that gap. So we actually have the time to do all of this mental gymnastics to figure out justified or unjustified. So that's just my 2 cents on mindfulness there.
I wanted to piggyback on that as well, because what we're talking about is slowing down. You have to slow down to be able to use mindfulness. You have to slow down to be able to reflect on your experience. You have to slow down to be able to decide. And you can't always slow down. So you're not always going to be able to do this. And that's okay. We're all just doing the best we can.
Totally.
And so sometimes the best we can isn't getting us out of some emotions that we really can't deal with, which is why God invented psychotherapists, in particular psychologists, because it's Psychology Month. And so if you want to get help from a psychologist, you can go to the BC Psychological Association's website. It's psychologists.bc.ca. They have a little tab called Find Help. Alexine has just put it out in the chat. They also have a phone number, which is Monday through Friday, 9:30 to 4:30. And that's where you can go get help. I wouldn't encourage people to do difficult opposite action work on their own. Opposite action work is the hardest thing in psychotherapy. Because if you consider apologizing when you're really mad and you think you're right, I'm not very good at it. And I don't think anyone else is either. But that's opposite action, right? It's really hard to do. And so if the situation is complicated, more complicated than just going, oh, okay, I kind of get how these feelings work. I can rely on the handouts from that talk that Michael and Alicia did. If it's harder than that, help is available, right? Contact a psychologist. I think we're in the last bit of the talk, which is the questions bit. So we've dumped quite a bit of information on you as an audience. The tables in particular have a lot of information. Please feel free to type questions into the chat, and you can either direct them at me or at Alicia, or just throw them to both of us.
Totally. Maybe I'll go back to that slide that had that QR code with the resource in case anybody wants to get their hands on it right now while you think of questions. There you go. Happy to go to a particular slide if anybody wants to revisit something they read in the table that didn't quite make sense, or maybe it would be helpful to look at the flow chart in its entirety, or feel free to just let me know and I'll happy to do that.
We have a request. Go to the second last slide now.
Ooh, second last.
Is it the reference slide?
Yeah, is it the reference slide or is it this one? Yeah. Or
was it? I think it was your emails, the contact slide, yes.
Oh, okay, right. So Alicia's at Adler, I'm at Michael Sheppard Psych Services, Inc. Oh, Maria, you asked such an important question. What if there is no solution? And that actually leads to the distress tolerance section. Can you go to slide 19, Alicia?
Yeah.
Sometimes the problem, it's either the emotion is too strong or it's not a problem we can solve. The emotion is justified, but it's not a problem we can solve. An example of that might be there's something in my life that I want and can't get, like access to my gym, or I don't want and can't get rid of, like COVID currently. And so that's a longer term problem and we can't fix it. And in that case, the skill is reality acceptance. There's a book by a psychologist named Tara Brach called Radical Acceptance, which is about that. For the purposes of this talk, that Michael's quick and dirty two-step solution, which is not a book long, it's 2 lines long, is thing 1 is to name the thing that hurts in fact-based language, meaning no interpretations, no judgments, no assumptions. What is the thing that hurts? And name that. So for example, it could be my marriage is over, or if your marriage is over, or my dog died. Whatever it is that hurts is the thing that you want to name repeatedly. You want your mind to get used to this idea. Time doesn't heal wounds, exposure heals wounds. And one of the reasons pain can linger is because we run away from it. That's why that opposite action and the mindfulness are useful. The other part is then to act as you would, like this is behavior. What would a camera observe you doing if you radically accepted whatever the thing is that hurts? And so, for example, if it's, I can't go to my gym is locked and I hate this and I'm frustrated about it, it's not changing and I have no control over it. What would I do instead? Maybe I would start working out at home, or maybe I'd start doing an exercise regime that was more cardio based outside, but doesn't involve the gym. I have to accept that the gym is closed. If you need more help with a difficult situation that can't be solved, I'm going to refer you back to that slide that has the BCPA contact info in it to get some help.
Yeah,
What were some
just to,
other?
just to piggyback though, like what you were saying, right? Like it makes sense, and it's hard, right? So it involves like a certain willingness to do the thing that we don't actually want to do or don't want to accept or face in that moment. So it's oftentimes going to be an effortful process where we choose to, as the phrase is, to turn our minds, to choose to do the thing that we don't actually feel willing to accept in that moment. But that is a harder process. So absolutely, that's a great example of when it makes sense to reach out for help.
What are some other questions?
How do you break a loop of emotional responses, even when you can identify you're reacting irrationally? So put another way, how can you defeat your avoidance, even when you're aware you're doing it?
I want more information about that question. Can the original poster elaborate? Okay, I'm going to work with it as is. If the action urge is to avoid, the emotion is, I'm going to guess that the emotion is fear, because something unpleasant or uncomfortable is under the category of danger. I don't want that unpleasant uncomfortableness. I'm going to assume that the emotion is fear. And I'm going to refer us back to that flowchart.
No, flowchart.
Yeah, thanks. So step one, I'm aware that I'm avoiding. If I'm not aware that I'm avoiding or not aware of what I'm feeling, then it isn't going to matter. But sometimes people just know what the behavior is. They don't really know what the feeling is. And in that case, we need to increase mindfulness. What is it? I'm making an assumption here that it's fear. It might not be, because some of the other emotions come with avoidance, like disgust can come with an avoiding urge and so forth. But most commonly it's fear. And fear can be of an unwanted emotion. So I could be afraid of guilt or afraid of shame or afraid of anger. Regardless, I'm avoiding something. All right, well, is that avoidance justified and effective? It sounds like by the question, it's not effective. Because I in the cycle of avoidance and the original poster here seems like they want to stop, probably because it's not effective, which puts it in the no, it's unjustified or ineffective. So the first step is to stop avoiding. Now that sounds so easy, and it sounds a little bit insulting. And so sometimes what we have to do is do this incrementally. If I can't fully avoid, can I partially avoid? Can I, if I'm doing a bit of the thing, let's say, let me rephrase this. Can I do a little bit of the thing that I'm avoiding rather than all of the thing I'm avoiding? I saw a gorgeous piece of wisdom on Facebook, and it always bothers me when I see wisdom on Facebook, because I want to see it in research articles and in books and things that carry more street cred than a meme on Facebook. But this one was by a psychologist, and it said, if you can't do something, do some of it. If you can't shower, wash your face. If you can't do the dishes, do a dish. Something is always more than nothing, and it's the little pieces that can pave the way to bigger successes. And that might be an example here, not knowing more about the situation. So try to avoid less, do a little more of the thing you're avoiding. I'll give an example from my personal life. I hate doing taxes, like I really hate it. And my wife got frustrated with me because I just wasn't doing it. And she said, Michael, what would you tell one of your patients? And I was like, oh, good one, damn it. And so I thought, well, what would I say? Because we're talking about avoiding here. And so what I did was I opened my computer and I opened the Excel folder. There was nothing in the Excel file. I had to populate it with all the tax information, and I stared at it, and I hated staring at it. I just loathed it. I wanted to get up. I wanted to do lots of other things, pretty much almost anything but look at the Excel file, until I started to get bored. And that's what Alicia was talking about. You do the thing until the emotion crests. I started to get bored. And when I started to get bored, I started to fill in the Excel sheet because it was better than being bored. I hope that gets at the original poster's question.
I also wanted to just jump in that, and one way to maybe think about this is that effectively this is a problem solving question. So what you were saying earlier, Michael, was that, you know, it's not helpful to do the thing. The solution that we're unlikely to do isn't a helpful solution. So if you're unlikely to just stop avoiding altogether everything or the thing that you're referring to, what Michael is suggesting is, okay, what are some alternatives that you might be more likely to do in pursuit of stopping the behavior that is causing you some sort of distress or harm or otherwise getting in the way? One other thing that's helpful to think about sometimes is to think about what we value, what's important to us in our lives. And so that can serve as a really potent motivator. So for example, sticking with the example of taking care of ourselves, maybe we're avoiding showering repeatedly or washing our hair or whatever it is, and we don't like that about ourselves, and you know, maybe that comes with a whole lot of judgment, et cetera, et cetera. But if we know that self-care is something that is really important to us, it's a value, it's like a compass for the way we want to live our lives. By becoming aware of the fact that this value matters to us and that this value isn't being lived in accordance with, we're not satisfying that value, it might actually start spurring this motivation for us to do those actions in pursuit of satisfying that value. It's just my 2 cents to add to that.
Cool. Are there other questions? I know the chat was busy, but I don't know what the other questions are.
This one might be interesting for you. It says, I get sad very easily. How can I not be so sad?
I love that question. Maybe you can't. And that's okay. Because if we, again, this unwanted emotions decision tree, I don't know what's causing the sadness, but mindfulness can help. Sadness signals loss. If it's justified, it signals loss, right? Oh, we're going there. Where is it?
Well,
there it is. Oh,
I also wanted to get to this eventually. Well, after you finish talking, I was just going to get to the slide.
Sadness signals loss. If there isn't loss, then sadness is unjustified. And so you want to do the opposite of what the sad urge is. But the way the question was phrased, I'm not sure. How long does the sadness last? Like, is it just a pang of sadness, or are you just bedridden for a week when you're sad? Oh yeah, I know where Alicia is going with this. Take it away. Actually, this is really useful.
Yeah, so one thought is, if you're feeling sad often, if you're experiencing an unwanted emotion often, one way to decrease our vulnerability to unwanted emotions is to make sure that we're actually stocking up on our coping gas. The thing with an emotion like sadness, right? Sadness kind of makes us want to withdraw. It makes us not want to get out of bed sometimes, or socialize, or go to the gym, or do any of the things we need to do around the house. And so when we give in to sadness repeatedly and for a prolonged period of time, chances are we're also not doing things that bring us any joy. We're also probably not tending to any of the responsibilities or the things that make us feel like I can do it, or I can manage, or I can cope. There isn't a lot of that mastery. So the B isn't being satisfied. And we might also not be coping ahead of the things that are likely to cause sadness, or likely to cause some other emotion that might be contributing to the sadness. So if we want to feel an unwanted emotion less, we need to make sure that our ABCs are met. And then we also need to make sure we're tending to our bodies. I don't know if, I'm not sure about who's actually out there, like in our virtual audience, but for those of you who've ever played The Sims, like a sim has it's like this virtual game where you pretend to be this little person, and you have to satisfy their needs basically. And they have these little health bars, you know, their hunger needs, their sleep needs, their cleanliness needs. And if you've ever neglected your sim, which I 100% have, when their bars fall low and they're really unhappy, it takes one trash can in the middle of the living room to make them go into a full meltdown. And I like using this analogy because we've all been there. Like, there's probably been a time that you guys can relate to, like having the flu, Your sleep is non-existent. You're eating your third bowl of cereal. You haven't exercised. You haven't showered. You're not going to be happy. It's going to take next to nothing to set you off. And whether the thing is the emotion ends up being sadness or anger, you're just much more likely to feel the thing you don't want to feel. So maybe this is one way to think about decreasing the probability of feeling that sadness that keeps coming up.
Our next question is, how would distraction fit into this decision tree? I feel so distracted with my own thoughts at times that tackling tasks or being present becomes difficult.
Alicia, do you want to do this one? Do you want me to do it? I noticed that I've taken the last three.
Well, I mean, it's completely up to you. Like one thought, the immediate thought that popped into mind was that mindfulness is where my mind went. So if it's difficult to focus and it's difficult to focus your attention or redirect your attention to either the things you have to do or to anything other than the thoughts that you're caught up in that moment, to me, that signals that this is a good opportunity to practice mindfulness. And I mean practice because it is that kind of muscle that needs to be built. It's something that you have to do consistently for a prolonged period of time to really see any effect. It's just like when you go to the gym and you lift weights for 1 week, you're probably not going to see a difference. You lift weights for 10 days, you're probably not going to see a difference. You're not going to get shredded right away at the gym, and you're not going to get shredded in mindfulness after 10 days either. So it sounds like, kind of doing some guided meditations that help you willfully redirect your attention away or towards something, or willfully redirect your attention to experiencing what you're experiencing. That might be one way to do that. Any thoughts, Michael?
Another thought is it could be something. It could be nothing. It could be just, under a little more stress, you're finding yourself more distractible. But difficulty concentrating could also be a symptom of something more. And so mindfulness will help you check in and realize, is it just that I feel a little more scattered because, my mind is going in 6 different directions and my normal routine has been interrupted by COVID lockdowns or new news or who knows what. I mean, Australia was on fire 2 years ago, so bad things are happening. And so it's useful to check as well, is it just difficulty concentrating? Because mindfulness is basically practice concentrating. And so, piggybacking on Alicia, yeah, I'd go directly with mindfulness if it's distraction. But if the distraction is actually avoidance, mindfulness will help you find that. If the distraction is avoidance, or if the distraction is an elevated mood where it's like, I've got so much energy, I can't focus, which could be something else. But mindfulness will help tune you into stuff that no one else can know because it's happening in your mind or in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
There's no more questions, but there is a comment about distractions being helpful for someone who's identified as having ADD. So sometimes the break is helpful. It's like a reset for me as long as I'm medicated.
Coping in general, when I said that distraction is a really useful skill for distress tolerance, like when your emotions are overwhelming, sort of in that last, can you show that slide, Alicia? Thanks. We didn't really talk about that now. When the emotion is way too strong right now, SOS, distraction, crisis survival skills are primarily organized around distraction. They're not only distraction, but they're mostly distraction. And the reason for that is you want to put something else in your mind than what the problem is. What the crisis survival skills do is they help you get through an emotional crisis without making the problem worse or making a new problem. Because you've got enough to deal with. You're already in the red box SOS. And so distractions can be helpful, but there's a slippery slope between deliberate distraction to help cope and avoidance. And mindfulness will help you know, am I coping effectively? Do I need to turn the heat down, or am I actually avoiding? Mindfulness is really the only thing there.
I like the something that came to mind based off of that is that distractions aren't inherently a good or bad thing. I mean, there are situations in which distractions can actually help keep us alive when we exercise it in a crisis, and we're just trying to hang on to ride out the wave of whatever intense feeling we're feeling. But sometimes distractions are a nuisance. Sometimes we are trying to accomplish a task. So in the spirit of mindfulness, one thing we can also try to do is not judge our distractibility, not judge ourselves for getting distracted. That's something else that might be contributing to that uncomfortable experience of getting distracted. Because not only are we getting distracted, we're then beating ourselves up for getting distracted.
And then I see here our last question. When did you say mindfulness is concentrating?
We didn't. I just said it now. But if you're paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judging it, you can't do that without concentrating. You're concentrating on something. It doesn't have to be really brutal, hard concentration, but Marsha Linehan, who's a Zen master and the author of Dialectical Behaviour Therapy, I went to a meeting that she was chairing, and she said, now that I'm a Zen master, I can tell you what mindfulness is. It's paying attention to one thing. She did that with her hand, and it makes zero difference what that thing is. And she did that with her hand. And so for our mindfulness exercise, then I focused on the power bar on the floor, not like a surge protector power bar that was on the floor across the room from me. It was beige. It had a little bit of black on it. The light was red. And I knew that power bar cold by the time we were done with the mindfulness exercise, but I had to concentrate on it.
Yeah, I remember you asking us to focus on the sole of somebody's shoe. You had us take off a shoe in class one time and examine the sole of a sandal to like the nth detail. And mindfulness, the skill building part, or what I described as the bicep curl of one mindfulness iota, is it's not actually about how long you can focus on something. It's not about how long you can concentrate on the power bar, on the sole of the shoe, on the candle, on the whatever. It's actually the act of noticing every single time your mind wanders and bringing it back. That's where the growth happens. So being really good at mindfulness isn't because you can focus on something for an hour and without getting distracted. You're actually really good at mindfulness if you catch your mind wandering. Our minds wander, it's just what they do.
There was a comment on mindfulness where concentration can focus on the negativity. What you don't want to do when you practice mindfulness is practice your symptoms. So mindfulness is not rumination, thinking like I'm depressed and I think I suck and I think everything sucks and it's always going to suck. And I'm really focusing on suckage. That's not mindfulness, probably because it's not deliberate, it's reflexive, because that's what depression wants us to do. But the other side of that is, even if you go there, you'll eventually fall through that into something deeper, because it's superficial to stay at everything sucks. It's not specific. It's not clear. There's not a lot to it. And so eventually you'll go beyond that and go, wow, I'm sure thinking dark thoughts, which is a very different place to be, because I'm not my thoughts. Just because I think everything sucks doesn't mean it does. It means I think it does. But that's a whole different talk on mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely.